Results from Super Tuesday 2. Sanders and Trump get big wins. Catholic scholars defend their criticism of Trump, why they don't think he should be the GOP nominee. Georgetown University faces backlash after students invite Planned Parenthood's president to speak. And serving in the face of violence, what church leaders are saying about the killings of 4 nuns in Yemen. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, March 9th, 2016.
I can be more presidential than anybody.
Donald Trump extends his lead over Ted Cruz as Marco Rubio continues to fall behind. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. Tuesday's presidential primaries produce a pleasant surprise for an underdog candidate. It's considered by some a stunning upset. Bernie Sanders wins the Michigan primary.
I just want to take this opportunity to thank the people of Michigan.
While Hillary Clinton still holds the lead in the delegate race, it represents an embarrassing speed bump in her efforts to pull away from the Sanders campaign.
We believe that our strongest areas are yet to happen.
Clinton did win Mississippi. Crowds cheered at her headquarters as supporters heard the news.
This campaign is about building a future where every American can live up to his or her full potential, no matter where you come from, what you look like, or who you love.
Thank you very much, everyone. This was an amazing evening.
Donald Trump wins the crucial victories in Mississippi, Hawaii, and delegate-rich Michigan.
One of the things I'm most happy about is that the turnout has been just massive.
He performed strong despite a barrage of attacks from opponents.
I don't think I've ever had so many horrible, horrible things said about me in 1 week.
Trump wasn't the only Republican winner of the night. Ted Cruz won Idaho. Now the focus is on next Tuesday with contests in Marco Rubio's home state of Florida.
I believe with all my heart that the winner of the Florida primary next Tuesday will be the nominee of the Republican Party.
And John Kasich's home state of Ohio.
We're now moving into a position where the people of America are beginning to hear this message, and it's going to get stronger.
Meanwhile, former presidential candidate Carly Fiorina announces today she's endorsing Ted Cruz for the GOP nomination. Fiorina calls him a leader and reformer who is willing to take on the status quo in Washington. Fiorina, a former corporate CEO, ended her campaign last month. Democrats Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders debate tonight at Florida's Miami-Dade College. The debate is sponsored by Univision and will be simulcast on CNN. Even though Sanders and Clinton split wins last night, Clinton earned more delegates. She now has 1,221 delegates compared to Sanders' 571. Trump leads Republicans with 458, followed by Cruz, who has 359. After earning no delegates Tuesday, Rubio remains at 151, Kasich increasing his total to 54. There are more major primaries next Tuesday, with a few smaller ones in the meantime. Republicans caucus tomorrow in the Virgin Islands, followed by conventions on Saturday in Wyoming, Guam, and here in D.C. Democrats convene Saturday in the North Mariana Islands. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. A key capture for U.S. Special Forces in Iraq. Iraqi intelligence officials say the head of the Islamic State group's chemical weapons unit was captured in a raid last month. This is a big win for Washington's more aggressive policy of pursuing the jihadis on the ground. Lauren Ashburn reports from the White House.
This particular capture is a major victory for U.S. Special Forces. Last week, the White House said it had captured an ISIS leader but refused to identify him. And now defense officials say that his capture led to the bombing of 2 chemical weapons facilities. In December, the Obama administration deployed a commando force charged with capturing and killing ISIS leaders in Iraq. It was part of a new strategy to degrade and defeat ISIS. When asked if the White House is surprised at the chemical weapon capability developed by ISIS, Press Secretary Josh Earnest said they are reviewing the reports.
If those reports are correct, it would not be an outlier in terms of the tactics that we know that ISIL uses. We know that ISIL is an extremist organization that seeks to achieve their aims by terrorizing innocent people.
The White House says to expect airstrikes targeting labs and equipment, and special forces are planning more raids targeting chemical experts. Brian?
Lauren Ashburn at the White House. Thank you, Lauren. A former Marine wanted in Idaho for an attack on a church pastor is arrested by U.S. Secret Service agents near the White House. Coeur d'Alene police say Kyle Odom was arrested Tuesday evening here in Washington, D.C. after throwing something over the White House fence. Meanwhile, Pastor Tim Remington, shot 6 times Sunday outside his church in Coeur d'Alene, is now conscious and talking with his family. Odom is suspected of shooting Remington a day after Remington led the prayer at a campaign rally for Texas Senator Ted Cruz. Police say they found no connection between the shooting and that rally or the presidential candidate. 9 Seattle firefighters are injured as an explosion levels 3 businesses early today. Seattle fire officials say that while they were investigating a natural gas leak, the building exploded. The blast sent debris across the neighborhood, shattering windows as far as 2 blocks away. The firefighters' injuries were not critical, mainly cuts, bruises, and some burns. No one else was hurt in that explosion. The Republican National Committee sues to learn more about Hillary Clinton's emails and text messages. The State Department has released more than 52,000 pages of her emails, including some that are now classified. Jason Calvi reports from the Capitol tonight. Jason?
Brian, Republicans actually filed 2 lawsuits today. They revolve around freedom of information requests into Clinton's emails and text messages. This comes as senators question the Attorney General about the ongoing FBI investigation into Clinton's email server.
The Republican chairman of the Judiciary Committee asked about media reports. The Justice Department had offered immunity to the former State Department staffer Brian Pagliano. He set up Clinton's email server in her New York home. Attorney General Loretta Lynch says she can't go into details about agreements they have with any witness in any ongoing investigation.
The consistency with which the department handles the ongoing matters, whether they involve someone with a famous last name or not, is something that we take very seriously. And so our desire not to discuss this matter in open hearings or in the press is not out of a desire to evade your questions or certainly this committee's oversight responsibilities, but it is how we handle ongoing matters.
Also at today's hearing, New York Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer said the Attorney General would have been a great Supreme Court justice. She has notified the White House she's not interested in the nomination. She said it would get in the way of her effectiveness in dealing with the many urgent issues at the Department of Justice. Brian?
Thank you. Jason Calvi at the U.S. Capitol. Catholic leaders criticize an invitation for Planned Parenthood's president to speak at Georgetown University. As Catherine Zeltner reports, they say the issue is greater than freedom of speech.
Should there be limits on who's invited to speak at a Catholic school? That's the question facing Georgetown University after the student-run lecture fund invited Planned Parenthood President Cecile Richards to speak on campus next month. These Georgetown students defend the invitation.
The point of having an academic institution is that you explore all sides of the issues.
Not everyone here is Catholic. Not everyone here is Christian. Not everyone here follows any religion necessarily.
Planned Parenthood is a very important organization.
With the nation's oldest Catholic university inviting Richards to speak on campus next month, critics say Georgetown is not upholding its Catholic identity.
Well, it's a horrendous scandal. Cecile Richards has presided over more than 2.8 million abortions as the president of Planned Parenthood.
The Cardinal Newman Society, a group that tracks Catholic education, says free speech is not the issue when you welcome the largest abortion provider to campus.
So there are certain freedoms. Cecile Richards would advocate the freedom to kill. Okay, this is somebody who absolutely should not be held up for standard.
D.C.'s Cardinal Donald Wuerl voiced his concerns, writing in his most recent blog, a school's Catholic identity is compromised by approving of ideas that are contrary to moral truth. The D.C. Archdiocese says they wish the lecture fund would discuss saints in place of that group's seemingly constant preoccupation with sexual activity, contraception, and abortion. Georgetown University declined an interview, but in a recent statement, the school maintains its Catholic and Jesuit identity on campus has never been stronger. Catherine Zeltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Catherine. And more than 36 leading Catholic scholars in an open letter urge fellow Catholics not to back Donald Trump. Joining us, co-author of the letter, George Weigel and Mary Rice Hassan, who signed on to it. I think we caught you by surprise, George. Good to see you.
Always a
Both
surprise at EWTN.
Yeah, why write this letter now? Why not let the democratic process take its course?
This is part of the democratic process, of which a crucial moment is next Tuesday with the winner-take-all Ohio and Florida primaries. And frankly, my colleagues and I thought it was time for us to say to fellow Catholics, do not be fooled. This man does not share our core concerns. There's nothing in his record, his character, or his campaign to suggest that he does. And there are alternative ways to express your disagreement.
But he says he's pro-life. He says he'll support a 20-week ban on abortion. He says he'll defund Planned Parenthood. You doubt his pro-life stance?
Completely.
Why?
If you think about the words that he said, that Planned Parenthood does wonderful work, I mean, that tells us not just what he thinks about Planned Parenthood, but that tells us something about how he looks at the issue of life and abortion. And so he's willing to measure by a utilitarian yardstick, where if Planned Parenthood does something that he considers good on Monday, treating STDs, and on Tuesday they're doing cancer screenings or something, and on Wednesday they're dismembering babies in the most violent way possible. For Donald Trump, he weighs and measures, and he comes out saying, that's okay, on the balance, they're okay.
I can't tell you guys how many emails I get from EWTN viewers who are backing Trump. They think we're slamming him all the time. They're rightfully upset with the establishment, the government. Why not give Trump a chance?
Because there's nothing in his record, his character, or his campaign, to repeat myself, to indicate that he can connect the dots between ventilating anger and public policy. He hasn't articulated an idea in this campaign, with the sole exception of saying he's going to order the United States military to commit war crimes.
He backed off on that.
Oh, he backed off on that, and then he re-backed off again. I mean, there is no body of thought here. And Catholics are the bearers of a tradition in which voting is an act of moral judgment. It's not a glandular exercise in which you express aggravation. Plenty of things to be aggravated about. Find another vehicle for your aggravation.
Right. There are principles at stake, and not just principles, but the reality that flows from that. So if you get someone in there with the wrong principles, we're going to have the wrong judges, the wrong appointments, the wrong emphasis throughout an administrative policy.
What if you compare him to the Democratic candidates?
I don't see much difference. The rhetoric is, some of the rhetoric is different, but when it comes to the issues that matter to Catholics, life, religious liberty, marriage, he's not with us. And it's time that I think people looked at that very seriously and acknowledged that.
What does the church teach us about voting?
It teaches us that voting is an act of moral judgment and moral responsibility. It teaches us to vote with our heads, not just our guts. It teaches us to be wiser than serpents and more innocent than doves in measuring politicians. It teaches us that democracy is a great adventure, but also a great responsibility. And
Indeed.
The democratic project is not advanced by a charlatan screaming and yelling about what he's going to do without any idea of how to do it.
We're going to have you both back. George Weigel, Mary Rice
Thank you.
Hassan, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Coming up, remembering 4 nuns murdered in Yemen. The church responds to religiously motivated violence. And difficult journey, the challenges migrants face even after arriving in Europe. Transparency regarding the church's assets, along with world hunger and food waste, are 2 key themes as Pope Francis continues his Lenten retreat with members of the Curia just outside Rome. Thanks for joining us this Wednesday evening, the 9th of March. I'm Brian Patrick. Authorities in India vow to help find a missing priest abducted last week during a deadly attack in Yemen. Gunmen killed 16 people, including 4 nuns, at a home for the elderly run by the Missionaries of Charity. Wyatt Goolsby spoke today with Bishop Paul Hinder, the Vatican's representative in that region.
Joining us now is Bishop Paul Hinder, the Apostolic Vicar of Southern Arabia, based in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. Your Excellency, what do we know about the motive for the attack on the elderly home?
All the indications show that it is a group of radical Muslim people. Definitely it is an act against the faith of these Christians. Don't forget that Al-Qaeda has its real origin in Yemen. then there's a network of other groups connected to Daesh or the ISIS and so on. And that makes the situation of Christians very, very precarious.
We've also learned an Indian priest, Father Tom, was kidnapped during the attack. Do you have any updates on where he is, and what can you tell us about what he was doing there in Yemen?
No, we don't have any secure information for the time being. And we can only hope that those who are looking after him may succeed to find him, and then we'll see. Why he was there, of course, as a priest, since then he was looking after this small community, especially after the sisters, and did it in a wonderful way. So he has, I would say, sacrificed his life, even if he is coming out alive. But it's wonderful to see with which commitment he did it.
Earlier today, you celebrated a Mass for the 4 nuns at St. Joseph's Cathedral there in Abu Dhabi. What's your message to Catholics in Abu Dhabi and the region?
I am in admiration of these sisters who knew that they were at risk. And I simply can say they are martyrs because they did it for Jesus Christ. And they lived the love of Jesus Christ.
Well, that is a powerful message and an important witness, and we thank you so much for talking with us about it, Bishop Paul Hinder, the Apostolic Vicar of Southern Arabia. Thanks so much.
Welcome. Thank you.
And Pope Francis was the first to call those 4 murdered nuns martyrs, the victims of indifference. The Vatican closely monitors the region where the Christian minority desperately needs support. Father Bernardo Cervellera is joining us from Rome. He's editor-in-chief of Asian News. Father, can you explain what life is like for Christians in Yemen right now?
Right now is very dangerous and full of fear for the Christians. But anyway, the point is that the community is very small because the Christian community is made of people coming from India, from Sri Lanka, from Indonesia, working there. They are migrant workers. There are only a few dozens of Yemeni local Catholics. And up to now, the population is very frightened, but there is still one priest who work with the sisters and with the Catholics, guaranteeing the sacraments and taking care of the flock of the Catholics there. The situation is very poor because they work and they are free of having their masses and meetings, but anyway they cannot evangelize the situation.
So, Father, do you think that was an isolated incident, that attack, or are the priests and nuns that are still there still at risk?
I think they are still at risk because in the past, in 1998, there were also 3 sisters of Mother Teresa who were killed in another city, Hodeida. And the situation was also there dangerous, and because there is this kind of war in Yemen between Houthi rebels and between the Sunni army, and this makes dangerous the situation for everybody. So I think that there will be some other violence, I fear.
But we will continue to pray for their safety. And Father Bernardo Cervellera, we appreciate you joining us from the Vatican's Asian News. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks.
And some human rights groups oppose a European plan to control the flow of refugees. Families have been displaced by years of war in Syria. Thousands have gathered along the Greek-Macedonian border. They're living in tents in cold, wet conditions after risking their lives to reach Europe. Now some are being turned away. Europe can't handle the number of asylum seekers.
These are the people fleeing from the Islamic State, from Assad's terror. Europe talks about human rights and about promoting human rights abroad, and now there's a crisis coming to Europe, and they close their borders.
Greece says it can't help all the people on its border. It wants them to relocate camps set up to provide assistance. Up next, remembering the 5th Beatle, the man who engineered the rise of the Fab Four. And a spectacle in the sky. See the solar eclipse in all its glory. Today, March 9th, is the feast of St. Francis of Rome. She was encouraged through a vision to share her wealth with the poor. After being widowed, she founded the Oblates of Mary. Francis died in 1440. Thanks for joining us this Wednesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. The South Carolina State Senate clears the way for a bill banning abortion past 19 weeks. That legislation allows exceptions only if the mother's life is in jeopardy or a doctor determines the baby can't survive outside the womb. It would be illegal to abort a baby with a disability if the child could live. If the House approves, the bill goes to Governor Nikki Haley, who is likely to sign it. Missouri State Senate advances a proposal to add greater religious protections to the state constitution for some business owners and individuals opposed to redefining marriage. That measure faces another vote in the Senate before it can move on to the State House. Democrats stalled today's vote for more than 30 hours. Dr. Matthew Bunson of Catholic University is with us, Catholic Distance University. The Pope will announce the canonization date for Mother Teresa next week. Yes. But let's learn a little bit about some of those lesser-known future saints, starting with the first Argentine to be canonized.
Right. Well, it takes nothing away from the extraordinary life and holiness of Mother Teresa to focus on some of these other saints who are going to be canonized throughout this year, who are going to be approved for canonization by the Pope next week. The one that you're talking about is Jose Gabriel Rosario Broquero, who was known simply as the Gaucho priest. This is a priest who endured leprosy in his own time, who cared for the poor, the sick, and the dying, traveled across Argentina in a sombrero and a poncho on the back of a mule, and is one of those beloved figures, and he's especially beloved by Pope Francis.
There's a movie script in that one.
There is.
There's already a push for Blessed Elizabeth of the Trinity to be named a doctor of the Church. Why?
A French Carmelite, contemporary and known as a compatriot of Thérèse of Lisieux. Same time frame. Elizabeth the Trinity died in 1906. This is a very contemporary figure. One of the great mystics of the early 20th century. And her writings are examined very closely now. And there are many theologians, many mystic theologians who really want her to be a doctor of the Church in much the same way that Thérèse of Lisieux is now a doctor of the Church.
It's a very small group.
Very small, yes.
Of the Church. So tell us the backstory behind Blessed Mary Elizabeth Hesselblad.
Well, she is from Sweden, the sort of restorer of the Brigittine tradition in Sweden. Was born in Sweden, but actually spent a number of years here in the United States. She was raised a Lutheran, but came into the church here in Washington, D.C. So there's that connection. She goes to Rome, wants to establish the Brigittine order again, but with a twist. She wanted her sisters to care for the sick and the poor and the dying. And that revolutionized, in a way, the whole Brigittine tradition. She was able to reestablish it in Sweden. But she's also a voice for Christian unity and is honored by the Yad Vashem as righteous among the nations for her care of the Jews. Look to Francis in October of this year, probably to do the canonization in Sweden when he is there marking the 500th anniversary of the start of the Protestant Reformation.
He's done it before.
He has.
Dr. Bunson, thank you.
Great to be with you.
Katie Couric, Chris Matthews, Newt Gingrich, and Wayne Newton among the mourners attending Friday's funeral for Nancy Reagan. Solemn ceremonies for the former First Lady are underway in Simi Valley, California. Public visitation at the Reagan Presidential Library began this afternoon. It continues tomorrow with the funeral and internment on Friday. Well, he left an indelible mark on music and pop culture. Beatles producer Sir George Martin has died at the age of 90. His management company says Martin passed away peacefully at home on Tuesday evening. His partnership with the Beatles over a 7-year span revolutionized the music industry. Sir Paul McCartney says he was like a second father to him, calling him a true gentleman. John Lennon's widow agrees.
Well, the first time I met him, I was very surprised that he was obviously from a classical background, and he had that sort of demeanor.
Martin was too modest to call himself the fifth Beatle, but Paul McCartney said today that if anyone earned that title, it was George. Until tomorrow, for the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. We leave you tonight with these images of a total eclipse of the sun unfolding over Indonesia. It briefly plunged cities into darkness as people gazed, cheered, and yes, even prayed. Good night. God bless you.